what are you an expert in? And for me, I'll say I'm an expert in leadership. And there are different delivery methods in which I can add value, right? It could be coaching one-on-one. It could be group coaching. I could be facilitating for a client, like workshops. I could be training clients in like a leadership training session. I could be authoring, like writing a book, writing social media posts, writing blog articles and whatnot. I could be speaking, right? So all of these different delivery mechanisms, they're just ways to express your expertise and share value versus, if you say, hey, I'm just a coach. Well, that's a description of your delivery mechanism, not really what you're an expert in.
Who is Colin Cox, and how do you introduce yourself at cocktail parties?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. What do you do?
Yeah.
It's actually weird because if I said I'm an executive coach, it's just one of many things, but no one knows what that means. I would think about it like this. I spent 26 years in tech and video game organizations, primarily in leadership roles from 17 years old. And I learned through all of that my real passion is people and leadership, not video games and technology. I was very intentional and deliberate about building up some skills and credibility to be a coach, a consultant, so that I could just entirely focus on helping other people grow and be better leaders. So, one way I might answer that at a cocktail party is, what do you do, Colin? I help leaders reach their full potential, something like that. But that's what it's all about. Executive coaching is not where you're the star. It's where you're very much in a support role, meeting people where they are, being an external sounding board, and being able to see things that people can't see themselves, all in service of helping them be better, faster, quicker. So that's in a nutshell what coaching is to me.
Yeah, that's helping people reach their potential sounds like obviously at once very important, but also very vague. I guess if we were to kind of go one layer deeper, what is stopping people from reaching their potential, broadly speaking?
There's so much, but one broad category of what stops people is people are just in their own head too much and overthink things.
Okay.
And it really helps to have external, like people outside, help you eliminate things. I'll give you an example. It was actually, this was the seminal moment when I decided to leave corporate life. I'd already made a decision that I wanted to be a coach consultant. So I'm doing executive coach training. I'm reading books on coaching, consulting, and sales and marketing because I'd never done that before. I need those skills. And I'm going to consulting workshops. And this one in particular I went to, Alan Weiss wrote $1 Million Consulting, ran some events. And I really loved his content and approach. It just gave me an absolute blueprint on how to start a career as a coach consultant. And I was at a small event with Alan, maybe 12 of us in the room in Newport, Rhode Island, 2.5 days, called the $1 Million Consulting College. And Alan had seen me now twice over a couple of years there. And at the end of this 2.5 days, I asked Alan, look, for me, there's so much stuff we've covered in the last 2.5 days. But if there's just one thing I should focus on, and I had not made the transition yet, I'm still doing my corporate life, my corporate job. What should I work on? And he looked me in the eyes and he said, Colin, if you want to be a consultant, you need to quit your job. It was just the very direct, this is the next step. You spend enough time preparing, getting ready. That's what you need to do. You need to actually take the leap. And it just, that combined with actually making my first sale gave me a lot of confidence that, hey, people value what you have to offer. So you're going to be fine on your own.
Yeah, just diving in and learning by doing rather than preparing, I think is really good advice. But you mentioned the confidence that came from getting that first sale. I imagine it wasn't like the first thing you did. Like, what was that transition? Was there fear involved? Like, how did you mitigate the unknown in that bridge between quitting your job and getting your first client?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is I love to follow resonance. So the first thing was, Colin, you seem to really enjoy developing others, helping people grow their leadership. So, interesting. Why don't you follow that thread? And and so I started to do that pro bono. I started to do, coach certifications, things like that. I realized early on, in particular with coaching, it really helps for clients to have skin in the game. So pro bono coaching, I mean, yeah, it can be powerful and it can work. But I realized pretty quickly, like when people don't have skin in the game, the stakes are lower for themselves. So actually, I started saying, look, I want you to pay for this, not for me. I want you to pay something so that you're getting more out of this and taking it more seriously.
Mhm.
So then that was easy. People said, okay, like especially if it's a nominal amount, no problem. But then when I started to very seriously talk to some people about it, and they're like, yeah, like we could be one of your first clients. Like we see this informal relationship we have is so valuable. Why don't we talk about formalizing it?
How did you go about putting a value, putting a price tag on your services?
Few different ways. In the that first big one I sold was actually following Alan Weiss's value based fees approach. And if you're interested in that, go look it up. I won't go deep on it, but values based is based on, look, if you're a consultant, it's actually unethical for you to charge by the hour, because you're incentivized to stay longer and earn more hours, right? Whereas it's in the client's best interest and even yours as a consultant for you to get in, help them meet their objectives, realize value as quickly as possible, and get out of the way. So Alan has a very good formula and approach to that. So I use that, and that worked really well. I don't always do that now. I sort of have some standard like products, like if I'm doing leadership training
Uh,
as opposed to coaching. I mean, just stepping back for a moment there, are you a coach is a question you could ask. But really, like, I think a good way to answer that is, what are you an expert in? And for me, I'll say I'm an expert in leadership. And there are different delivery methods in which I can add value, right? It could be coaching one on one, it could be group coaching, I could be facilitating for a client, like workshops. I could be training clients in like a leadership training session. I could be authoring, like writing a book, writing social media posts, writing blog articles and whatnot. I could be speaking, right? So all of these different delivery mechanisms, they're just ways to express your expertise and share value. Versus, if you say, hey, I'm just a coach, well, that's a description of your delivery mechanism, not really what you're an expert in.
your facility with language is unique. How did you develop that skill?
I think I'm actually an elementary speaker, but I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I don't consider myself actually tip top in terms of mastering language. I'm pretty loose actually.
Okay. Well, you're parsimonious with your words when you need to be. Sometimes you'll know just what to say. And I often find myself like over explaining or speaking too long. So I'm impressed with how you're able to
Mm.
just deliver what needs to be said. And I think that that adds to your leadership aura and perhaps in your communication as a tool for conveying those thoughts to your clients.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think part of that is, I don't know, I've invested a lot in communication skills, less so as a coach, but more as an executive in my past life, where you just need to be such a good communicator to get things done. Then when you do coach training, I mean, a lot of coach training, no matter who does it, will generally say, look, as a coach, you should talk 20% of the time. Your job is to be curious, be present, and ask short, powerful questions to help a client figure things out on their own. And so, like, the best questions in the world are 5 words or less. So,
Interesting.
in a way, I almost lean into that too much sometimes, David, where I kind of worry sometimes I could be accused of just being super short and to the point where I'm not giving enough context. But I think a lot of us probably talk too much, especially in the workplace. We just go on and on and on in meetings, and we want to be on page 9 of a one-page story. So I kind of index the other way.
Also, maybe continuing on from that, you had somewhat of a atypical academic path compared to some executives. And I wonder, how do you look at the education model, let's say, if that's not too broad? Because it seems like you learned in the field and tried what works, and almost like developing a minimum viable product and prototyping and very quickly getting in that data, executing instead of planning, let's say. Whereas I look at, or I've heard it said, I should say, that the academic model trains people to be employees rather than to be leaders. Now, I realize that's very broad, but what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's multiple paths, right? My path was unorthodox. I dropped out of high school in grade 11. Later went on to do an MBA in Oxford at the Open University. And so that's kind of weird. I don't know many other people. I've met one other person who's a high school dropout with an MBA. So it's a weird path. But by the time I did my MBA, I had 7 years of management experience. And I found like that gave me so much useful context for doing something like an MBA, where, even the structure of that program was some case studies, but a lot of it was, okay, the topic we're exploring is, for example, employee engagement. We want you to go study your workplace and apply what you're learning here and write about it. And that's your assignment. So it's very experiential. And great. Honestly, probably the one of the most useful things I learned doing my MBA was just this skill of critical thinking. Because before, you don't know strategy, you go learn about strategy in an MBA and then try and apply it to a small organization, and you're like, wait a minute, like this doesn't feel right. This feels like it's a square peg round hole kind of thing. And then you learn to critically evaluate, like, actually what models are out there for anything, and like how can we use them rather than just using them blindly. So yeah, that was kind of in a way how that whole experience went.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think in there is kind of a superpower where you're able to take a bit from both sides, maybe taking a different path, getting some academic exposure, and also getting some mentorship from people at different generations or different experiences, trying things, seeing what works. So all of the above. And it seems like you didn't really follow a formula, at least not initially. And then you arrived at a place where you figured out what you were good at, what you were an expert at, and figured out how to provide value to others. And you seem very successful in what you're doing. If I recall correctly, you're the chair of two CEO forums. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And in addition to that, you have clients in North America, at least, if not perhaps around the world. And you're starting to do some public speaking. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in a nutshell, things I do, I chair two CEO peer groups. I do a lot of leadership training. So I built a year-long program called the Leadership Advantage. Lead yourself, lead others, lead the organization. And I run that for lots of different industries. I'll do executive coaching for CEOs, mid-level managers, and I do a lot of one-off things too, David. I've run group coaching sprints for solopreneurs to try and share what I've gone through making that transition to solopreneur life. I'll do sessions on executive team cohesion, where we're detaching to work on the team. What are the behaviors we need to do to actually deliver on the great plans we come up with? Yeah, I've run some one-off leadership events for CEOs and executives of all different organizations to come to. I like to learn by doing, and I like to try things out. So, part of the downside that comes with that is you're not doing just the one thing over and over and over again. You're doing many different things. I'm also Clifton Strengths certified. I just
Oh,
this morning ran a half-day session on Clifton Strengths, which I absolutely love. Um, so yeah, I just learn by doing. It's the way I've always learned. And ironically, or maybe not, in Clifton Strengths, one of my top five strengths is learner.
okay.
So high school dropout, but I absolutely love to learn, and I think it's a superpower of mine.
Okay, I have a question for you. What
Yeah,
were you at all ashamed, or did you feel lesser than because you didn't quote unquote finish high school?
never, never ashamed, never feel lesser than. I never talked about it that openly until maybe 5, 6 years ago. Not out of shame. I just didn't think it was necessary. And then I started to read the people that I did tell were like, that's a really cool part that makes you unique. And it's such a great story. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like if it's valuable for people to hear about my path and it being different, I'll talk about it more often.
Yeah.
But I've always been pretty self assured. I have a lot of belief in myself, and it's good. At times maybe you're like think you're better than you actually are. So sometimes you got to go to like a real deep place and realize, I had one person. I was at an event for consultants, and I brought up an issue I wanted some support with, and this other coach said, "Hey, Colin, do you want the feather or the hammer?" I'm like, "Oh man, give me the hammer." And he says, "You're not adding as much value as you think you are." And I'm like, yep, you're right. I need to hear that. So it's great. It's great to have confidence in yourself, but you also need to be open to recognizing, look, you really got to dig deep and improve what you're doing sometimes.
Yeah, we all do. I mean, there's no upper bound to our progress. So it is good to hear that. And your balance, I think, is important too. You're obviously highly intelligent, but I was curious with the concept if we're social creatures and we compare ourselves to others to an extent, like do I wear my shirt on my torso or my legs, for example? But for me, I felt like I could have done more, and that always kind of haunted me. Where I was just a voracious reader, always going to like libraries, even though I didn't go like the formal academic route, and asking people questions anywhere I could, just trying to learn, because there was this feeling of just I didn't know enough. And it looks like perhaps you're a little bit different, but you definitely found your own way, and now you're the leader among leaders. So it's interesting how that kind of works out.
Yeah, and I think I'm still finding my way. I think we all maybe are. And one recent way that I'm trying to find my way is this. And I always look for what I can learn from different situations. At the time of this recording, the Vancouver Canucks hockey team, I'm in Vancouver, is in the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And part of the narrative around it is there are some star players that are not performing up to their potential because they're trying too hard, right? They're trying to add too much value. They're trying to do too much. And some of the advice being shared is they need to just let the game come to them. And that's something I'm really reflecting on for myself right now is I really want to be different and better than whatever the standard is out there for a coach or a leadership trainer or whatever. And I'm starting to think at times, am I trying to add too much value? Am I squeezing the proverbial stick too hard and just actually getting away from like the basics that make leadership training so good or coaching so good? I'm not so sure, but that's just my current thing about like, how can I elevate myself even further is where do I need to stop trying so hard and actually just let the basics take over.
You mentioned the basics a couple of times there. Could you share what are the basics?
Basics for
Leadership training.
yeah, the basics for leadership training. I think leadership training gets a bad rap sometimes. I think justifiably so. It can be passive. So on the one hand, if you go to a leadership training session and someone like me speaks over PowerPoint for an hour, 90 minutes, half a day, a full day, I mean, I don't think it's going to be that effective for most people because I think most people learn by doing. So when I actually think what are the basics for leadership training, it's got to be training that is effective, meaning it gives people tools that actually changes their leadership behaviors and improves their leadership. And I try so hard to make my content practical and engaging to hit that probably at times I'm actually averse to having collateral like high quality presentation slides or handouts that go after it. And maybe that's a way where I'm overthinking it. Actually, Colin, just have that stuff, but still bring the practical, engaging style, do exercises, do everything you can to make this training effective. But you don't need to try so hard to differentiate yourself because there's also a reason why it works for the standard trainer.
I think one assumption that I might have had is that someone who has leadership experience in the video game industry might not translate to leadership experience in the auto industry or in another, like healthcare, let's say. And yet, I imagine people in your CEO forums come from a variety of fields. Is it like the principles are pretty much the same, or have you had to learn a lot about different industries in order to translate some of your learning in the video game industry?
Yeah, So much overlaps. There's some nuance. I don't know if I had to take a wild guess, 80% plus of leadership transcends industry because it's about people.
Mhm.
And then 20% is contextual. One example, that the construction engineering is a market that I have lots of clients in. And I'm like, none of that is intentional. None of that is me going out and like having campaigns. It's just I've had some clients where it's a lot of construction engineering professionals, and whatever I'm doing resonates. And so now I have lots and lots of clients there. There's a bit of a relation with engineering minded people, right? So a lot of them, I even had a sales call earlier today with someone at a small engineering consulting firm, and they said, hey, we're 14 out of the 15 of us are technical and there's one non-technical person, and we really want to invest in soft skills. So there's definitely in software engineering, mechanical engineering, and all of that. I see a big need for more soft skill development, and they're coming to me for that. But a lot of it, I mean, I'm just sharing the same stuff I share with anybody, because a lot of leadership is just about good interpersonal skills. I think other things like leadership is more than just leading people. It's also leading yourself. It's also leading the organization depending on your role. So some people, like, we got to get into like, how do you set metrics? How do you understand financial statements? What are the right financial metrics to look at? And that can be contextual. Some organizations really value some metrics over others. So
Mm.
yeah, in a nutshell, I'd say 80% is the same and maybe 20% can change.
And I imagine doing it for a number of years now, you're learning as you go as well. You're learning about different industries and adding value. Perhaps you're taking something from engineering, construction engineering, and applying it back in the video game industry. And so there's probably some innovation opening up to you in your position as a chair.
Yeah, it's a huge learning experience, and I mean that's one of my Clifton strengths as learner. It keeps me not bored. I am definitely not bored. Learning tons, and even being in the CEO peer groups. I was a member of one for 5 years before I became a chair and left corporate life. Just being a fly on the wall. Even listening what other C-level leaders are struggling with and need support with, things that I've never dealt with before or after, but just being able to be a fly on the wall and hear them talk about it, hear other C-level leaders share their experience. You just learn so much. It's incredible.
Are you going to get in trouble if I ask you, like, what's your favorite industry?
Oh man, I don't think I'll get in trouble. I don't know. I don't think I have a favorite industry, but what I love about construction engineering is that it's highly precise. If you're building bridges or infrastructure, you can't afford to be kind of flippant with a lot of your decisions, but you don't need the same level of precision with all the people issues. In fact, you often won't ever get that. So I love working with construction engineering firms, because it's like making sense of, here's the thing that works for your technical decision making that needs precision, and the people stuff that's a little bit more messy and difficult. A little bit same with software development. So yeah, I don't know. That's what I like about those two industries in particular.
What do you want to do that you haven't done yet in leadership training?
Good question. Probably write a book.
Okay.
Probably write a book. And I've been doing this now on my own for over 5 years, which is a pretty short amount of time, I guess, depending on your perspective. But I feel like I'm still doing quite a lot. I mean, I could write a book on people management fundamentals. I could fill 300 pages of useful stuff there. But that's one module in my 12 module leadership advantage program. So part of me is hesitant to write a book, because I have so much interest in all these facets of leadership,
Mm.
and to write a book in one place means I have to go deep there, which might one day I might be interested in, but I quite like being a generalist at this point.
Okay. And speaking of books, do you have any books that you recommend to others that want to learn about this?
I've got lots of book recommendations. Define this. What specifically do you want to hear some recommendations on?
Well, let's say leadership training.
Like To get better at leadership or to get better at training people on leadership?
Oh, I see. I guess more the former, like to get better at leadership.
To get better at leadership, my all-time favorite book on leadership is called Extreme Ownership
Oh, okay.
by Jocko Willink and
That's
Leif
good.
Baden.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's a bit, it can come across as a bit alpha, right? And
Okay.
and I would encourage people not to let that put you off. Jocko and Leif are very humble. Jocko and Leif led a SEAL task unit in Ramadi, Iraq, and came back and did leadership training for the SEALs and then consulting. And the book they wrote, Extreme Ownership, is about 12 leadership principles. They don't claim as theirs. They say, look, these have been around for centuries. We're just writing about them. And we're writing about them by, for each of these principles, sharing a story about this principle in play during their deployment in Iraq, and then a description of the principle, application in business and life. It's just such a powerful book. And the central theme with extreme ownership is, look, as a leader, you're responsible for everything in your world. Don't blame anyone else. Put the lens on yourself. And I think that's such a powerful message today.
Couldn't that also be applied on an individual level across the board?
Yeah, leading yourself, taking ownership over leading yourself, your family, those around you. You don't need to be a leader by title to get tremendous value out of that kind of book.
You spent a lot of time south of the border in the US. Is there like a cultural difference to how you help C-level executives in the US versus Canada? Or is it pretty much close to the same?
Yeah, I think it's close to the same. The only difference I've observed, and I've heard this from other coaches, consultants as well. This is not my experience only, but organizations in the U.S. I think have more of a get after it attitude. Like at least with me and the other coaches consultants I talk to, they're more willing to invest in leadership training and coaching. They're more willing to invest in outside support to move the needle. And I obviously see that in Canada. Probably at this point, 70-80% of my clients are in Canada. But it's just a little bit less assertive or less aggressive in like, yes, let's invest in coaching. I see that a lot. So just more of that assertiveness or aggressiveness, I think.
Do you, I don't know, I'm just asking honestly here, do you think some of that might come from the cost of failure? It seems that the cost of failure in the US might be greater, so they want to try anything they can to succeed. I'm just guessing. The get after it attitude, that is.
Yeah, I'm really not sure. I mean, it's something I'm still keeping my radar up and looking at. I haven't thought about it too deeply.
Have you done some leadership training in, say, Australia or the UK?
Yeah, UK a lot while I was there. The one difference I'll say there, and anyone who's in Europe listening, I hope I'm not offending you, but part of what I heard is an aversion to the sort of North American rah rah type of leader, and I think that's true, right? I think at least what I've seen, from my time in Europe is like, look, we just want authenticity, right? We don't want like fake confetti cannons and pom poms. We realize, you got to energize us, but gosh, like we don't want it to be phony. And so when I've done some sessions there, like I just make sure that I show up authentic and not like trying to be overly optimistic.
Yeah, that's probably good advice for all of us. Sometimes I think in North America and particularly perhaps in the States, sometimes there's a larger than life persona we put on leaders, and maybe there's an assumption that you need to be that. And these days, I think everyone's seeing behind the curtain, thanks in some part to perhaps social media and other things, other factors. But it seems like now there's a thirst globally for authenticity, even if it's a disagreement to an extent, because from there you can build, like on that bedrock of at least honesty, you can then build a bridge instead of a bridge on sand. Who are some of your favorite like speakers, like public speaking?
Public speaking, great question. I would say, okay, we can start with sort of like celebrity-ish or like well-known published author level. Some of these people I've seen in person, some just online. Marshall Goldsmith, who is an executive coach, wrote What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Okay.
Phenomenal book. Seen him speak live. He's a great speaker.
Yes.
Vern Harnish wrote Scaling Up. If anyone's interested in sort of a blueprint for how to operate an organization, Vern Harnish in the book Scaling Up is terrific.
Those are two good ones. I like the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I think that's really important. There's another book, Jumping the S Curve. And similarly, like knowing when to pivot. You look at like the Blockbuster Netflix model, and I'm sure many models like that, many examples. I'd like to look at like a case study of an area that you had impact, given like for people that think it's woo woo or don't know exactly what you do. How does someone like you who's a generalist come in to a CEO who knows his industry inside out? It's what he eats for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He's been there 20 years, and he's got 20 years on you on this planet. How are you providing value to him or her?
Yeah, I'll share one, and if this one works for you, what I'll share is where I help the team with their own cohesion, their performance, and their health as an executive team. Will that example work for you?
Yeah, sure.
So this would be an example, and this, I mean, I'm thinking of one in particular, but there's probably a half dozen where it's very similar, where I've helped people in this kind of place. It's where the team has a really good grasp on their industry and their plans. They might have a good strategic plan, but for whatever reason, they're just not executing on it, right? They're coming up with excuses as to why things aren't happening instead of results. And so in this one case, there'd been changes in the team, so personnel changes, a new leader came in, and it was pretty clear right from the start. It's just everything had changed. So the baseline level of trust was not high, right? People didn't know each other. People didn't feel safe to speak up and say what's on their mind. You know, the term I hear today, psychological safety, right? How safe do you feel to say what's on your mind? I think that's such an important baseline for any team, not just an executive team. But we just needed to build that up based on all the recent changes. So, you know, I spent time with this team every quarter for, I want to say, just about 2 years. And we basically said, okay, like we're, in addition to planning, you know, what are our numbers going to be and our targets? How are we going to track those? Let's put the lens on how we need to work together to make sure that we're working towards collective success. So we would just audit things like trust and our ability to have healthy conflict. We would talk about how can we, like, should we hold each other accountable in our team meetings or not? Should we save face? Like, what do we do there? And generally talk about how to build trust, how to listen to each other, how to value different perspectives and different skill sets in the room. And if you try to do any of those as a one-off, it tends not to have a whole lot of steam, right? So being able to detach from all the craziness of the work you're trying to get done, put that lens on, have honest talks about what we need to do differently or better, and then make commitments. You know, here's my commitment to the team on what I'm going to do differently this next quarter. And here's my ask of the team. What am I going to do differently next quarter? And then the next quarter you meet, you check in on those things. So there's accountability. You know, are people doing what they say they're going to do? And so that kind of thing can have a lot of impact on teams, because when they don't have that safe place to say what's on their mind and talk about their issues, they tend to bottle it up. It creates a lot of confusion or siloed thinking. And if the executive team is dysfunctional, guess what's happening with their parts of the organization? So yeah, that's it. You know, similarly, in a different team in a similar situation, I help them create what's called a team charter, which is just a small, you know, a short list of behaviors that this team creates that they believe are vital for this team succeeding. And, you know, I did this with the team once, and I didn't see them for another year. And I wasn't sure what the impact was. And, you know, they came up to me leading up to that session and they said, oh my goodness, this team charter we created, it just made such a massive difference. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Nice.
So sometimes it can just be simple, but, you know, the common thread is detaching to put the lens on the health of the team and the performance of the team and just being honest about what needs to be better.
It sounds like those all play into the culture of the organization, and you're helping to lay the groundwork for that culture with the team charter and doing temperature checks, finding that balance between how much do you assert yourself to create a backstop for psychological safety instead of waiting to be given that psychological safety, and how much of that psychological safety needs to be given to kind of start that engine. Is that more or less like accurate?
Yeah, it's you just got to talk about the elephants.
Okay.
You got to and when you can equip a team with permission to speak up and have conflict and the tools for how to have conflict with tact, then all of a sudden the conflict isn't that difficult anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. What do you think about your industry? Do you think is there any threat coming from, say, AI, or do you pivot with that? Are you in like kind of a growth mindset where the more leadership coaches, the merrier? Are you collaborating with other leadership coaches, for example?
Yeah, so a few thoughts. I collaborate occasionally. I'm collaborating with one other person in particular right now on a new bigger project. We're doing leadership training for a really large organization. So we partnered on that, which is super fun. I think I actually work better when I'm partnering with people, which is an interesting choice for a solopreneur. I think AI is augmenting. It's going to augment coaching. I think for people that can't afford an executive coach, then being able to use generative AI like a first port of call. Hey, pretend you're an executive coach. Here's like my context. What would you do? I think that's awesome. I think you can get a lot of value out of that. But I don't know that anything's going to replace human, right? And like there's some
Right.
one-on-one coaching clients I have where I've coached for 2-3 years probably. I think the longest client I have is probably 3 years. And so the
Okay.
amount of context and knowledge and relationship that I have to be able to give them if they need advice. I mean, coaching is not about advice giving, it's about asking questions. But this sometimes
Hmm.
people want mentoring too. Colin, tell me what you think I should do. I think there's always going to be a place for that.
Yeah. No, I agree. Are you using generative AI on the other side to help you develop?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I'm using it with mixed results.
Okay.
I use it as an assistant to help me plan and prepare things for one. So for example, if I'm running a workshop coming up on influencing skills and leading change, I mean, I have my own content I've developed and deliver on that, but I'm spitting that through generative AI like ChatGPT and saying, hey, like, what would you do to make this better? What other research and data points should I be thinking about to make this content better? So I'm using it as an assistant to help me with content improvements, generation. I've tried to use it to sort of draft social media posts, but I find maybe it's just me not training it enough. But like what I come up with is not anything I would post. I just love, I don't know, the real authentic me posting. So I tend to stick with that.
Yeah, I dipped into it for a while, and then I kind of came to a similar conclusion. Like you said, the
Yeah.
humans were, I don't know if we're stubborn, but it certainly seems that's where the best value is in each other.
I'm getting good success actually having it help me build case studies.
Okay.
So, I did a session recently. I partnered with somebody on decision making and psychological safety.
Okay.
And we wanted to build a case study to give the team a chance to put in practice everything we shared around decision making, psychological safety. So we built that case study 70% with ChatGPT. It took editing, tweaking. We couldn't just use the first thing it spat out,
Sure.
but it did a great job of just doing the legwork of us with our prompting to kind of get something and then make it better, better, better to a point where we're like, okay, this is ready to go.
Where? Okay. I want to say something that might seem as flattery, and I don't mean it that way. And in order to just be brutally honest, I'll just tell you, when I see people who speak really well like you, I've learned to be skeptical because it seems like it could be used as a tool for manipulation or fooling people. Um, and with you, I'm impressed that you have the courage and the grit to put yourself out there in different environments. But you've actually done the work, it seems. You're actually meeting people. You mentioned Alan Weiss. I don't think you mentioned that he's also one of your coaches, your mentors. You're constantly, like I've spoken to one of your clients as well, who used to be my mentor, and you're the real deal. And you are humble, you are hardworking, and you are, I think, really good at what you do. And so I just want to thank you for being generous with your time, helping me with all the questions I ask you, coming on the podcast and sharing a little bit about what you do and a little bit about how people can find some value if they're not ready to hire someone like you to help them. And just in closing, is there anything that like you'd like to point us to where we can keep in follow with what you're doing or look at anything else in your field?
I mean, just first of all, thank you, David, for saying that. I really appreciate that. You know, as a coach consultant, often the impact we have happens between coaching calls. It doesn't happen in the session necessarily, right? And so you sometimes hear about your impact after, which is fantastic. But just to hear you acknowledge all that, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And if I could turn that back on you, just I love chatting with you. I've loved to get to know you over the years. You ask really good questions. You're really inquisitive. And the fact that you're taking this exploration, what it seems like you're doing is you're following your own curiosity, but you're sharing that with the world, with the podcast, with the magazine, all things like that. It's awesome to see that part of your journey as well, David. So thanks. And just thanks for giving me a chance to talk with you too. This has been an awesome conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you. It wasn't a quid pro quo, but I'll take it. And is it colincox.com?
ColinCox.com.
I'll put that in the show notes. And yeah, maybe we can do a round two after you do your big speaking gig, which we didn't really go into, but I'm really curious to hear more about that and continue checking in with you and just seeing how I can be a better leader. And maybe we can collaborate on something else in the future.
That'd be awesome, David. I'd love to do round two, and definitely we'll keep in touch.
All right. Thanks.